I would not be half the counselor I am today if my parents hadn't gotten divorced, because I have all of those things too. I understand it better. I have more empathy. I have more awareness, so many things. And I think, obviously, my sister and I would have loved for our parents to have stayed together. And I think that's true for any kids. And it can both be true.
Welcome to Desperate for Hope, Conversations on Divorce. I'm your host, Vaneetha Reisner, and today my guest is Sissy Goff. Sissy is the Director of Child and Adolescent Counseling at Daystar Ministries. She's co-host of the amazing podcast, Raising Boys and Girls, and she brings decades of experience and a deep love for Jesus to her work with families. So I know our conversation about parenting through divorce will really be helpful to listeners. So listen in if this is where you are. Welcome to the show, Sissy.
Oh, Vaneetha, I'm so honored to be here. And I don't even know if you know this about me, but I have kind of an interesting family story where I was an only child until 16. And then my parents told me they were pregnant, which evidently I said to my mom, I didn't know y'all did that anymore. And so I have a much younger sister. And when she was 6 and I was 22, our parents got divorced.
Oh, wow.
And so I walked through this myself as a young adult, which I don't think a lot of people talk about what it's like as a young adult for your parents to divorce. And then I watched my baby sister, who I adored, experience it as a 6-year-old. And so I am so grateful for this conversation as a therapist, but also just as a person, because as you and I were talking before we started, there aren't enough conversations happening about this. So really grateful for the good work you're doing.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, Sissy. That just brings a whole nother layer of what you're going to share is having been through it, watched it, just from different ages. So I'm even more excited about our conversation. Well, before we jump in, I'd just love for you to tell our listeners what your day-to-day life looks like, where you live.
Well, it's confusing because I have a lot of hats that I wear, and I am a practicing therapist on 2 days a week. I'm sitting with children and families, and I sit with a lot of kids of all different ages who are going through all kinds of loss, grief, trauma, normal developmental stages that feel hard and confusing, and just all manner of kids. And then do a lot of parent consults too, where parents are saying, help, is this normal? What do we need to be doing? And we do those in person and virtually out of Nashville. And I work in this. You can see behind me. Are you on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay. If you're watching on YouTube, I have these children's books behind me that are actually based on our work at what we call the Little Yellow House, which is where I get to practice. And we take our dogs, several of us take our dogs to work every day. So I have a little therapy assistant named Patches. And these books are based on the Daystar dogs and talk about different issues that young kids are going through. So 2 days a week, I'm sitting with kids and families. 1 day a week, I'm doing a lot of kind of oversight administrative stuff at my practice, doing a lot of supervision of our younger counselors. And then on Thursdays, I get to podcast, and we have a little podcast called Raising Boys and Girls. And then if I have any spare time on Friday or the weekends, I get to write. I've written a few books along the way and travel and speak. And so a lot of different things. And then I try and watch good TV when I'm not doing all those things and play with my nephews.
Oh, I love it. Wow. Thank you. That sounds like,
Yes.
what spare time probably isn't, not tons
Not
of it,
abundant.
but yeah. Well, Sissy, I know you've walked with countless children and their parents through really hard seasons. And my first question is something that every parent is facing. How do parents hold onto their own, when they're holding their own grief, how do they still show up for their kids in the midst of that?
It's such an important question because it is true. I mean, you are grieving the loss of what you thought your life would look like and the loss of this person that you loved. And they're still here, which in some ways, my mom would have said for her was even harder, I think she felt like. And so you're experiencing this, and then you're so worried about your kids and you're watching them walk through. And I mean, I think I cannot overestimate the importance of self-care and support in the midst of that. You need scaffolding as a parent. And I would say you need a therapist that you can talk to, somebody that can listen and you can pour out everything that's going on. And you need somebody for your kids if you're walking through this, because my experience over the years, and I can't remember if we said I've been counseling kids for 33 years, I think now, but my experience is often kids don't want to talk to their parents because they sense that you're sad already and they don't want to add to that burden and that weight. And so I think having somebody in your corner that can hear your kids, that can hold what they're going through, tell you the things that you need to know within the bounds of confidentiality, and just support both of you feels so important. And I think you need to be doing a lot of things away from them. Do not be afraid to get babysitters. Do not be afraid to go have a meal with friends, even go on a trip without your children, send them to their grandparents. Those things are so important. And I think it's easy to feel like I can't do all of that because I've just got to be with them all the time. And the truth is, as parents, whatever situation you're living through, any of us give out of an overflow of what we're receiving. And it's so easy to feel like you're on empty. And so you just have got to have things that are giving back to you.
Oh, Sissy, that's such a great word, because I'm guessing people are tuning in saying, I'm so weary.
Yes.
And just this encouragement, like, take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So thank you for that. So kind of switching gears a tiny bit, I realize, but what guidance would you give to divorced parents when co-parenting is hard? Because that becomes the place where often there's no break, when co-parenting is just draining you and hard.
I talk to so many parents in that situation. And I think it's interesting, Vaneetha, all these decades of counseling, probably the piece of it that's hardest, I think, for so many parents anymore is technology. Because there's always been that proverbial Disneyland parent who's not holding boundaries. And bedtime's important, but it's different than they have no set boundaries around technology and the things that your kids can be exposed to. And so I would say, first of all, if there is any way for you to have a mediator, I don't mean legally a mediator, but a person, even if it's a therapist. I sit with a lot of couples who are in the process or have gotten divorced just to say, hey, you guys, for the good of your kids, they need the boundaries to look as similar as they possibly can. Let's talk about technology. Let's talk about the things you're each going to have true in your house. And so I think if you can find somebody to do that, that is absolutely the ideal. And a neutral party that you can find that you trust, maybe you do the research first, to have somebody like that step in and help, that has a wise, trusted voice, is so important. Now, if you can't do that, and there are a lot of situations where the other parent is absolutely unwilling to step into those places, I would, number one, pray that they shift. But two, I think it's interesting. I had a girl that I worked with probably 20 years ago who, her mom didn't have a lot of boundaries. Her dad had more, and she was going back and forth. And I remember seeing her one week and her in tears because she said, I wish my mom would ground me, because that's what parents do when they love their kids. And so if you are listening to this and you're co-parenting with someone who is not putting good guardrails around your kids, I think what I would say to that is Disneyland is a fabulous place for any of us to visit, and none of us want to live there. It would get old pretty quickly. And so that parent looks like the fun parent for a good stretch of time. And then, even if your kids don't say that to you, boundaries create security in kids. They feel safer within those boundaries. And so continue to be the parent that you know God's called you to be. Do the things that you know are right, and just stay true to that, and trust the process that your kids are going to see the importance and value and have gratitude eventually. They may be 30 when they get there, but eventually they will come back to that. So hold to what you know to be true.
Amen. Yeah. I can so relate to that. I feel like I was the rules parent, and for a long time I was no fun, and yet my
Yes.
kids have thanked me for that. So, but
Oh,
in the
I'm so
midst,
glad
it
for you to
is
share that.
not fun at all because you feel like,
No.
okay, everybody wants Disneyland. So,
Yes. But I would say to that, Vaneetha, I think to think about, I mean, I remember sitting at a dinner with my dad when I think my sister was probably 7 and it was really fresh. And I knew from hearing from Kathleen that he was just talking at her all the time. And him saying, I just have so little time with her and there's so much I need to say. And it can feel like that. Again, your time is now divided in half or potentially less. And so if you're the rules parent, if you're the parent that you feel like is teaching the important lessons, you still have got to carve out time to just enjoy them, where you're playing with them, where you're delighting in them. And it's not all about that. And so the balance is still important. But I would say both are true.
great word. Like, if you're the rules parent, you can't think that's all you do because the other person is so much fun. Like, you need to
Right.
be balanced in yourself.
Yes.
Rather than just a counterbalance. So, yeah, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, Sissy, when do you think parents should have the what's going on talk when they've decided to get divorced to their kids? How should they do it? And what should they say and not say?
Mm. I think I talk about this weekly in my office. And what we will typically say to parents is you need one sentence in terms of what's happening and why. And age appropriate, not a lot of information. We just couldn't get along anymore. But you want the messaging to be as similar as it can possibly be. And you say one statement, and it's amazing, Vaneetha, something I have watched over the years in every situation with kids, whether it's divorce, whether it's loss, whether it's a trauma that they experience, is kids have this amazing innate sense that they ask the questions when they're ready for the answers. And if they don't ask, it means they're not ready emotionally. And so I will have parents come up with some kind of starting statement, say that, and then I think we always need to include things like, you did nothing to cause this, and there's nothing you can do to fix it. And even though we're divorcing, I will never divorce you. I will never stop loving you. That is not what happens in families. We need to remind them of some of those really important truths. Anything you feel is okay, and you can talk to me about anything. It's okay. So, and tell me what questions you have. So I would have a couple of blanket statements like that, and then let them ask you. Then when they ask a question, give another short, age-appropriate answer. Let them ask the next question. And that way they're leading the conversation, because I think sometimes out of our own grief, sometimes out of our own anxiety about how do I talk about this, we end up oversharing, and kids weren't ready for that. And so trust that little innate sense in them. And then as they get older, you'll give them more and different information. But it's amazing. I have had kids at 9 ask for very specific information, and their parents gave it to them age appropriately. And then I remember a family I worked with that the kids, not until they graduated from high school did they ask what really happened, because I think inside of themselves, they knew there had been this really hard part of their parents' story, and they just weren't ready for it, weren't ready to grapple with that truth. So I think, again, it's just so important to let them lead the way in those conversations.
That's great advice. Well, I would ask, what would you advise for the person who has maybe been left and betrayed and wants to say, I wanted the marriage? Just to kind of let the kids know this isn't my fault, which is kind of the way our minds are wired.
Yes.
What would you advise them in that situation?
I think there is certainly room to say, I'm so sad about this too. This is not what I wanted for any of us. Where you're not necessarily throwing the blame on them, because I'm sure you talk about this regularly, but we just want to be so careful that we don't talk bad about the other person, because it always tends to rebound and come back to you. And so I think as again, answering truthfully, which is where I think it can be helpful to say something like that. I didn't want this either. I'm so sad for you. And I hate that we're going through this. But I'm here for you. But even if when we share a little bit about what we feel, which I think is really important, I think it's also important, and I didn't say this before, in the messaging for kids to know, I'm sad too, and I'm going to be okay, and you're going to be okay. That I think anytime they sense those big feelings from us, they need to know we're still okay and we're going to make it through this, even if you're still trying to figure out how to believe that for yourself.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Now, do you think parents should have that conversation together or separately?
I think if they can, if there's a way to make that work, because I think that makes kids feel more secure. And there are times that it is not going to work. And that's okay, because I think kids need to know that you're their source and that you're always going to be a trusted source. And so if you can do that together, and if somehow that ex-spouse or divorcing spouse is going to sabotage you being the source, then I wouldn't worry about that piece of it as much.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, what reassurances would you offer kids? And you just mentioned some of them. Are there other ones that you would reassure them, whether it's the day of disclosure or just walking through divorce?
I think probably the ones I mentioned feel like the most important, and some of it, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about developmentally, some of it shifts along development, what kids need to hear. But I think just that sense of, I am here for you. I'm here for you. You can say anything to me. I'm not going to be mad at you. It's okay if you're mad at me, but I'm not going to feel that way with you. And we're going to get through this together. And we're still a family, because I think that can feel so shattering for kids so much of the time. And so to communicate things like that, I think is really important.
I love that. We're still a family, because you don't feel like a family anymore.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
just as you mentioned, if you could briefly talk about just how kids at different stages and ages respond. I mean, there's people listening with toddlers, elementary age kids, teenagers, even adults. Just how do they understand typically and respond to divorce? And in each stage, what makes them feel secure?
Yes. I mean, I think in every stage, you being a steady, non-anxious parent that is with them, I think is just the most important, certainly. And letting them feel whatever they need to feel, through every stage, that's going to be really important. I think with toddlers and younger children, developmentally, they really see themselves as the center of the universe, which is why we want to say, there's nothing you did to cause this. There's nothing you can do to fix it. And I want parents of younger kids, especially, to be very aware, and this is going to sound really hard, but I want you to be aware of things like holidays and birthdays, because I see a lot of parents who, out of the very best of intentions, say, we're going to keep doing all those things together. And then inevitably, in those situations, what happens is if one of the parents remarries, then the reason we don't do holidays together anymore is because of the new spouse. And so I already don't like this new person potentially that's coming into my life, and now it's all their fault. And so what I will say to parents is, as you think about what you do moving forward, it needs to be sustainable. It's amazing if you can have holidays together, as long as if things change, you can still have holidays together. And I know families who've done that, and it's been a beautiful thing. But I think that's an important thing to consider as you're talking about young children. And then as they get older, well, and I know we're going to talk about signs that kids are struggling a little bit later. So we'll come back to that, because I think that shifts some too. But I think as they get older, they're going to mask their feelings more, and they're going to act like they're fine. I think, well, I was going to say especially boys, but maybe both, depending on their personality. And I had neighbors that I loved that were so fun, and they got divorced a couple years ago. And their little boy was over at my house. I think he was probably 11 at the time. So pushing up on adolescence, trying to be cool, all the things. And I will never forget, we were sitting on my porch swing. And obviously because of what I do and because of what I've been through, I felt so like I wanted to be able to be there for them if I could. And so I was asking him how he was doing. And we were looking, the way we were sitting looked at his house. That was our view. And his parents were outside together. And he said, it's okay. It doesn't really bother me at all. And then his parents hugged and he stood up and he said, my parents just hugged. Oh my gosh, my parents just hugged. Did you see him? Did you see him? Did you see him? And I thought, oh, it's there. It's still there. And I think sometimes we don't know how desperate they are in those moments, how much they're watching. And Christmases together, birthdays together, the little moments of kindness can feel like, I feel like the Parent Trap did us a disservice because I think kids can think, can I get my parents back together? Is there something I can do? Especially the younger kids. And so I think we want to remember that that's going on underneath a lot of, I'm fine. It doesn't bother me. It impacts all of them. And again, the closer they march toward adolescence and through it, they may act like I'm fine. And I think too, at any age, really, girls and deeply feeling boys, I would say younger and probably more empathetic adolescents are very in tune to you. And sometimes they won't let themselves talk about their feelings if they sense that you're having a hard time. And so, again, it's where I think we need other places to process and to circle back. And I think with adolescence, it's always important that we're having conversations more shoulder to shoulder than eyeball to eyeball. And so if you're wanting to check on them, laying in bed, scratching their back at night where they're not looking at you, taking the dog for a walk, make sure, I want to come back and talk about dogs in just a minute, but taking the dog for a walk, doing things around a task, I think sometimes we can get to the more important conversations more easily because adolescents anyway feel awkward with intimacy with their parents. And so the harder conversations, that can feel even more true. So I think we have to be more strategic in how we help them open up.
Okay, wow. I'm taking so many notes. Sissy. Thank you.
So kind.
Okay, this was amazing and wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Do want to ask one quick question about what you said before we just move to the next one, which is very related. But you said a non-anxious parent. And I would love for you to just briefly unpack that because I'm sure a lot of parents are like, I am anxious. How can I become a non-anxious parent?
Well, I mean, non-anxious is not even really an option in our world today. I have written a couple of books on anxiety, and one of them is called The Worry-Free Parent. And in all the research, one of the things I read was anxiety is a response to cumulative stress over time. And when I think about our world, even if you're not going through a divorce, just our world in the last 7 years, we all feel so much stress. I mean, we are carrying so much cumulative stress. So I think if you're a functioning adult in the world today, you have a little bit of anxiety. So maybe we should recategorize that to an adult who's processing their anxiety regularly, who's doing their own work outside of their kids. And really, I wrote The Worry-Free Parent to kind of work people like me out of a job to say, here are the things that are most important to think about whatever you're going through so that you can show up for your kids with a lot more steadiness and a lot more calm. So that would be my answer to that question.
Great word. And that sounds like a great book. If people are listening and saying, okay, I'm anxious. How do I parent in the midst of that? Like take care of yourself and face your own stuff. So thank you.
Yes.
Well, you just mentioned some great ways to sort of reach kids. I loved shoulder to shoulder, not eye to eye. But some kids, just kind of move along, and then others are sad. And how we get that, there's sadness with this, that's natural. But how do parents distinguish between normal sadness and something that needs professional attention? And what behaviors do we really need to pay attention to?
It's such a good question. And I think there are probably a few things I would pay close attention to. One is always going to be with kids regression. And a lot of kids are going to do that in this season. I feel like I have sat with a lot of families who their older kids, early elementary, start using a lot more baby talk kind of language. Um, Kids who have accidents that haven't had accidents in years can start to do that. I think more clinginess and any of these things can be normal for a short period of time, but it's when kids get stuck in the midst of this. Withdrawal from the things that they love, kids who are no longer, especially teenagers who aren't wanting to spend time with their friends anymore, teenagers spend a lot of time in their rooms, but who are spending an inordinate amount of time in their rooms. And I think we want to be very aware of that anytime we're going through loss or you're walking your kids through something like that, that even if they're in there, we're just knocking on the door every so often and saying, "Can I bring you anything? Want some cookies?" Food is always a great inroad. But anything we can do like that where we're just saying, I'm here, without having to say those words. But I would say those are some of the biggest things. Getting more anxious. So I've written books about it. We are now in this epidemic of anxiety with kids. We're looking at 1 in 4 kids, 1 in 3 adolescents. Girls are twice as likely to deal with it as boys. And I think anxiety often is a byproduct of kids who aren't really processing their emotions. And it's kids who are really kind and conscientious and trying hard and care a lot. And so they don't want to say, "I'm really mad at you," or "I feel really disappointed," or "I hate that our family is like this right now." And so they shove it down and it comes out sideways. And so any of those things that you're seeing, and my sister would say, I could say this with her permission, but like I said, she was 6 when it happened for us. And my mom found her in her closet cutting up her clothes. And her clothes she loved clothes. She actually owns a boutique in Nashville today. So she has loved clothes her whole life. And I think she had a lot of anger, a lot of confusion, and she didn't know what to do. And it was like, I'm going to take something I love and rip it up or cut it up because that's what it feels like is happening in my world right now. So I think any behavior that's out of the ordinary like that. But as we said before, I feel like any kids going through this experience could benefit just from having another person on their team that can listen and sit with them in the midst of what they're going through.
So would you recommend going to a counselor or a friend? What if counseling is super expensive for a family and they're like, I don't know when I can take my child, or it's expensive.
Yes.
What would that look like for them?
Well, I would say start with calling your church, because churches sometimes will underwrite counseling for families, and it could be amazing if your church has something like that. Some churches also have counseling centers, and there are a lot of counseling practices that are based on a sliding scale. So don't be deterred by just thinking, counseling is expensive, but for example, we don't ever turn anyone away. So we base our fees on the income of the parents, and we take into consideration divorce and single parenting and all those things. And so don't decide you can't do it before you reach out and ask some people, because there are a lot of people that want to help and would love to make it work for your family. And yes, if not, then I think for you to have somebody that you can walk with regularly, talk with regularly, again, that's scaffolding for you. And is there somebody that works with your church that is a trusted grown-up? Is there an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent who could step in? And again, they're not afraid of hurting your feelings, and they can say anything to that person. Teachers, I think my sister's kindergarten teacher was just instrumental in helping her work through it. And so who are the grownups that you trust their voices that you could pull in to support them? I think that's a very important consideration. Okay, so over the years, it is amazing the amount of kids who will say, my favorite person to talk to about blank is my dog. I remember a girl whose dad died saying she talked to her dog more than anyone. And I had a family, this is one of my favorite practical things I've ever known anyone to do. They had a dog, and their dog did the same visitation schedule as the kids. And so it wasn't just the kids that went back and forth, but they had this. We talk about transition objects are so helpful for kids. And they had this amazing, beloved dog that was a steady, consistent part of their lives, whichever home they were in. Now, that's easy to say and a lot harder to pull off sometimes, but I do think that is a beautiful practical suggestion. And to all of that conversation, I got my first dog the Christmas after our parents split up because my mom knew it was going to be a hard Christmas. And so she got sister puppies for my sister and me. And it shifted the dynamic of that morning so considerably. And again, gave us something we could pet and help regulate our own emotions with. And so get a dog if you can.
Yeah. Well, I would second that. I'd never had a dog. We got one the Christmas after their dad
Vaneetha.
left. And that dog, I think, saved my younger daughter's life. Like she would
Yes.
just sit in the room with the dog. And so
Yes.
I wasn't a dog person. I was like, am I really going to do this? But I knew she really wanted one. And it was the best thing I ever did. It was a little
Way to
dog. We got a
go.
miniature poodle. So it wasn't like giant running through the house. So I would absolutely, reinforce
That's
that.
awesome. Yeah.
So, yeah, super sweet little thing. So kind of related to that. So this is maybe a little older kids. When they shut down emotionally, they just don't want to talk. They don't want hard conversations. They maybe don't want to go to counseling, which happened with one of my daughters. How can parents keep the door open without pushing too hard?
Ooh, that is so tough. And I'm going to go back to counseling for a second and your great question. If you feel like your kids need it and they're saying, I don't want to do it, or why do I have to do it? My favorite conversation ever, a mom said to me when the kids said, I don't want to go, a mom said to me, and they were not going through a divorce. They just sensed some things going on in their daughter. And she said, honey, my job as your parent is to build your team. And we have people on your medical team that are your doctors. We have people on your academic team that are your teachers. Of course, we're going to have somebody on your emotional team. So we're just doing this thing. And I think they just didn't accept no for an answer. So if you can do that and you can get them there the first time, I definitely have had parents bribe their kids to get them there the first time. And then find a counselor that you feel like would be warm, would be engaging. I think when we're talking about kids, personality matters as much as anything. And even if you need to go meet with the people first, because if we're going to counseling, we're aware that we're spending the money. Kids aren't, and they don't necessarily care. And so I think really good therapists with kids know how to win kids over. And I would say 98% of the time we can pull that off in our practice. Not always. There are definitely times that we can't. But 98% of the time with kids we can, because we just will say to kids, give it 3 times. Try us out. If you don't like it, you don't have to go back. And I think even saying something like that to your kids can empower them to feel like they have a little control, which can be helpful because they feel really out of control in this process. So that's to the counseling point, if you can get them there. If you can't, I think exactly what we talked about, of thinking about creative ways where they don't feel like you're trying to get them to talk. How can you engage them and pay close attention to, with teenagers, always when they have been with friends, when they're coming in, it's really late at night, you're tired, you don't want to talk anymore, but they all of a sudden do. Stay up and do whatever it is. Make hot chocolate together, make queso, it does not matter. You lean into those times that you can tell they're a little bit more open and more willing to talk. Often kids will talk more when we're driving the car because, again, we're both facing forward rather than eyeball to eyeball. And so trying to be really creative and thoughtful. And I think starting to learn, I think sometimes as adults, we keep it going too long. We just linger in these conversations because we're trying to get all the information and we think the door's never going to open again. And kids that intensity is way too much for them. And so even if you were to say, okay, I know you don't want to talk about this. I'm going to ask you one question every so often. I won't bug you more than that, but you got to answer my one question. I think when we can bring more playfulness even to it, because I always think with kids, intensity from us translates to anxiety for them. They just feel like, I'm in trouble. I want out of this conversation. And so, how can you be kind of playful and disarming in your approach? Obviously, the questions are going to be more intense. Okay, this is my one time to ask a question. And again, do it baking something together, going for a walk, playing a game. Anytime you can be unpredictable, I think can be really helpful.
That's great. I have to say, I remember when my daughter was like a young adolescent, I took her to Chick-fil-A. I'm across the table from her and I'm like, talk to me about what's going on. And she's like, oh my gosh. She was like, nothing, I'm fine. And I was like, no, I know something's going on. And I don't know why that didn't work. She just looked at me like, okay, you want this entirely too much. So
yes,
if I had known what Sissy's teaching me, I would not have done that. But
one of my favorite acronyms is FINE means feelings in need of expression. Feelings in need of expression. So you, again, playfully, you can be like, hey, guess what I learned about FINE? And I would just push a little. And then if you can't get there, try again later. Just keep trying.
Oh, gold. I love that. Feelings in need of expression. I feel like I'm going to be using that with my adult married kids now. So what do parents do? So you've given us some great ways to engage. What when they blow it? They lose their temper, they take their stress out, they press their kids past where they're comfortable. What do they do next?
I think, Vaneetha, a lot of us grew up with parents who never apologized to us, who never said, hey, I blew that. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And I think there's so much power and redemption in, as a grown-up who loves a kid, saying, I messed up too. And this is a total side conversation about where I feel like kids are and my concern I have about kids today. One of them is that I'm seeing more perfectionism in kids than I have ever seen. And so they are either feeling so much pressure and so much anxiety as a result of it, or they're shutting down. Like, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not even going to try. And so I think for kids to know that we fail is such a gift to the kids that we love. And when it's experienced in relationship, I think it has even more power to build bridges rather than blow them up. And so I think going to them and saying, I'm sorry. And you know what? All of us, our emotions are bigger than we are sometimes. And it's not who I want to be. And will you forgive me? I think it's just such a powerful example of that. And even what can I do to help, or let's figure this out together, I just think is so invaluable with kids. So it is never too late to come back, even to listen to this and say, you know what, there's some things I want to do differently, and I've been messing up, and I haven't been a steady presence for you. And I really am committed to being that. So let's figure it out together.
Wow, that's great. What about if you feel like you've messed up, but you're not exactly sure, but you can tell your kids are pulling away? What would you recommend for a parent who's not like, I know I probably did something, but I don't even know what it is?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I think especially if you have adolescents, I think it'd be great to ask, hey, what can I do to be a better mom? How can I help make it easier for us to talk? Because sometimes I can tell it feels really weird for you, and I don't want it to feel that way. I had a mom and daughter who started having conversations sitting on the couch back to back in a third person. So suppose there was a mom who, and her daughter would say, well, suppose there was a daughter who, and they would have these beautiful, deep conversations, but all about somebody else. Not really. So, I think asking can be really great. I also think shared journals. I love when parents and kids have things they write back and forth, don't even have conversations about them, but you ask a question like that. What can I do to make our relationship better? And you leave it on his or her bed. You don't even acknowledge it. He or she, I think it probably works better with girls, but they get to answer, put it back on your bed, and then you can have this conversation again that doesn't have that intensity along with it that we often will bring to conversations. So I think those are a few practical tips.
I love that. Shared journals, because sometimes people don't want to talk, but they will process it and write it and have the chance to say it the way they want to. And then you
Yes.
can respond the way you want to versus, kind of shocked look on your face or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So,
One other practical thing I would say really quick is that I love when families have code words.
mm,
So if you know you're blowing it, or if you feel like, am I being too intense right now? If you know that's kind of your thing, that if you know that's your thing you do regularly in conversation, I think to say, hey, let's come up with a code word when I'm asking you questions and it feels like too much. And you get to say watermelon or whatever it is. And at that point, I know, okay, conversation's over. Or you can tell I'm getting frustrated with you in a way that's not helpful. Or I can tell you're getting frustrated with me. Basically, those are the times that we're going to pause. We'll revisit the conversation. It doesn't mean you don't circle back to it later, but in the moment, we're not getting anywhere helpful or productive. And so we're going to put a pause and anybody gets to say the code word.
ah, ah. Yeah, that is great because things escalate and nobody knows how to de-escalate. So,
Right.
what a great idea, code words. So, kind of pivoting a little bit, this is a question based out of some of the people I know or people who have written to me, asked me, they've been through a divorce and there was abuse involved for the mom generally, and not to the children though. So the spouse has joint custody or partial custody, and they want to make sure their kids are safe when they're with their ex-spouse, but they don't want to poison the kids and say, what is dead? Just kind of interrogate them. How can they just keep tabs on that?
Yes.
Sometimes emotional abuse, gaslighting types things, and they just want to say, is my child going to be safe?
Yeah. I really believe one of the hardest pieces of divorce is you have been married to this person that's really difficult, abusive sometimes, and now all of a sudden you don't get to keep an eye on their relationship with your kids. I just think that is so terrifying for so many parents and causes them to lose a lot of sleep. And so, I think that is a place I would certainly have a therapist because it can be, we know that kids love their mom and dad, and there can be a loyalty that is really unfounded and dysfunctional. I don't know another word to use to say it, toward the other parent in particular. And I think if they sense, even if something hard is going on, if they sense you pushing too much, I think we can touch on that loyalty piece in them where they can make their shield that much thicker. Whereas a third party doesn't feel as much like that. And you can say to the third party, hey, this went on and I need you to be keeping eyes on my kid and seeing if you can get to things, because I think sometimes we can do that. Not always, but sometimes we can do that and then equip them with skills in terms of how to handle it. Because again, you just have to be so careful in how you respond that they don't end up shutting down. Now, this is such a nuanced question because there are times that I think we do need to be able to say that they are going to talk to you. And you can say things like, of course, that didn't feel good. Let's talk about how you can handle it. And I think in situations with parents who are emotionally abusive in a lot of different ways, we want kids, number one, to trust their gut. And I think when we completely shut it down, sometimes we're not teaching them to trust their intuition. And number two, they're going to have to learn to use their voice. We want them to learn to do that with that parent. And so when we can say things like, I think we can try to be as neutral. Of course, that didn't feel good. What do you want to say? What do you feel like would be helpful? What would you say to anybody in that situation? That's awesome that we're being pretty neutral, but we're still really encouraging them to find that voice and use it. But I would watch for signs of them communicating it to you without communicating, just like we were talking about the regression, a lot more clinginess with you more tearfulness. I think the transition is hard for a lot of kids, young kids, especially in the early years. I think it is harder in that situation for kids because it's so much more disruptive, the difference in the two households. Um, but I think bottom line is if you sense something is going on, definitely get a professional involved who can be that third party to step in and help. And I would certainly make sure if you have been abused that you have reported it because that needs to be in the mix so that if anything ever comes up, that's that. This is a silly analogy in this situation, but the ball's already moved down the field to some degree so that your child is protected that much more. And hopefully if there's been anything like that, I think supervised visitation is really important. So making sure, I think you have a third party involved in terms of therapist and making sure, I think anybody in a situation with an ex-spouse that you have questions about in those ways, you need to have a trusted attorney that you can talk to at any point and pull in.
Oh, great. Yeah. Thank you. Because I know there's lots of people listening, or maybe just a few, hopefully, but, in terms of who are dealing with this. But it's a pretty difficult, weighty thing to be struggling with.
Absolutely.
So just as we're wrapping up, I'd love for you to speak directly to the listener right now who's kind of lying awake in tears, worried about how this divorce is going to affect their kids.
Yeah. A couple of things. I did a parenting seminar on co-parenting years ago, and I asked, I think 5 kids to come with me to answer questions for these parents. And it was so fascinating. I didn't even know that this was going to happen, but every one of those kids said, I would be a different person if my parents hadn't divorced. And I like who I am better today because of it. It has changed me in really important ways. I'm deeper, I'm more thoughtful, I'm more empathetic. They had all these beautiful things to say. Now, they were all older teenagers, so they had gotten to more of that developmentally. But I believe kids are so resilient in the midst of this. And I have watched so many, thousands of kids walk through it at this point in my counseling career. And I believe they certainly come out on the other side stronger and more resilient for having walked through it. And I would not be half the counselor I am today if my parents hadn't gotten divorced, because I have all of those things too. I understand it better. I have more empathy. I have more awareness, so many things. And I think, obviously my sister and I would have loved for our parents to have stayed together. And I think that's true for any kids. And it can both be true. And I think my sister would say and I think in some ways probably had better relationships with our parents individually after the marriage was over than before they divorced. And so I would love for it not to have happened. And I'm grateful for God's redemption in the midst of it.
Wow. I love that. What an encouraging word for everyone listening who's worried about their kids, recognizing God redeems. So, Sissy, for people who want to follow you, know more about your books, your ministry, where can they find you?
raisingboysandgirls.com. We have all the things that we are doing, and we try to be pretty active on Instagram. I do at Sissy Goff, and then David Thomas, who is my dear friend and colleague, that's kind of the male version of what I do. We're together at Raising Boys and Girls, trying to put out a lot of hopefully helpful information. And we have a new book. I forgot to say, I should have mentioned that. We have a new book coming out this spring that you can pre-order now called Capable, which I think is, to this conversation, it's probably an important book for any parent who's walking through this. Capable is the parenting book, and then we have a workbook called I Am Capable, of just helping kids develop more resilience, no matter what it is they're going through.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds like gold for everybody listening here. Capable. So, Sissy, before we wrap up, there's something I like to ask every guest. what is something fun that you love so much you could practically do an ad for it?
Oh, that is such a fun question. I think right now it is my sister that I have talked about several times. She lives 3 blocks from me, and she has 2 little boys, a 7 and a 3-year-old, and they call me Diddy because I wanted them to have a special name for me because thousands of kids call me Sissy. And so, anyway, they call me Diddy, and we get to have, I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas, and in Arkansas, we called sleepovers bunkin' parties. And so once a week, if I'm in town, we try to have a bunkin' party. And it is a blast being with those little guys. And so I would do an ad for bunkin' parties with Diddy.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, Sissy, thank you so much for joining us today and just helping us learn about how to care for our kids as we're going through divorce, what to do, what to not do. I know this will be a lifeline for so many single parents, and I'm praying that this conversation equips them, reminds them that they're not alone, and that God will redeem this story. So if this conversation has been helpful for you, I would encourage you to share it with someone who needs it. So I'll see you next time. Thanks, Sissy.
Thank you for having me.
My joy. Thanks for listening. This podcast goes along with my book, This Was Never the Plan, Walking with God Through the Heartache of Divorce, available everywhere books are sold. If this episode was helpful, you can follow the podcast wherever you listen. Links and resources mentioned are in the show notes. See you next time.